This episode is sponsored by ExtraHop. ExtraHop provides threat detection and response for the enterprise, not the starship. On-prem security doesn't translate well to cloud or multi-cloud environments, and that's not even counting IoT. ExtraHop automatically discovers everything inside the perimeter, including your cloud workloads and IoT devices, detects these threats up to 35% faster, and helps you act immediately. Ask for a free trial of detection and response for AWS today at extrahop.com/trial. Last week saw the rise of AWS Infinidash, an imaginary AWS service that doesn't, well, at the time of this recording, really exist. A few questionable takes have been floated that it's an excuse to be crappy to recruiters, or that it's somehow punching down at people who haven't gotten in on the joke yet. I disagree with those perspectives and suggest that this is instead an opportunity to see the purest expression of an AWS service launch, specifically because there's no real underlying service to hold it back. If I ran AWS marketing for real, instead of the running gag that I do it part-time because I sat in an empty chair in Seattle once and got stuck with it, I'd be taking copious notes. The complaints are the easiest place to start. What's wrong with AWS Infinidash? Well, admittedly, not much. Since this is an entirely imaginary service, any criticisms of it are, of course, perceived criticisms of AWS's products and/or launch strategy. Let's explore some of them. Naming. There was initially some confusion as to whether the service was AWS Infinidash or Amazon Infinidash. AWS is notoriously prickly about this, to the point where it's the single most obnoxious part of getting through reInvent's slide review before you're allowed to give your talk. The fastest path through this Gordian knot is for Amazon to relax its brand standards here. It's not like they're going to launch an AWS Infinidash and also an Amazon Infinidash, are they? Please tell me they're not. Lack of launch day support. No less a personality than AWS VP Jeff Barr himself highlighted the lack of CloudFormation support at AWS Infinidash's launch. This is a tricky thing. How CloudFormation implements a service is very much a one-way door, but launching without it is a sign that AWS lacks confidence in their interpretation of how the service will be used by the customer. Others similarly lamented the lack of tag coverage, familiarity with Infinidash among AWS staff, or the lack of content on the AWS documentation site. Certifications. A bunch of folks posted certifications on LinkedIn and similar places. I think this was something of a swing and a miss from the community. AWS has never once offered a certification in a specific service. Rather than dismissing these, part of me wonders whether the community might be onto something here. I know AWS is a nonsensical statement these days with roughly 250 services under the AWS umbrella. If AWS offered mini certifications on a per-service basis, that might lend itself to people hoping to gain employment in the AWS ecosystem, painting a clearer picture of what their AWS expertise really covers. This episode is sponsored in part by LaunchDarkly. Take a look at what it takes to get your code into production. I'm going to just guess that it's awful because it's always awful. No one loves their deployment process. What if launching new features didn't require you to do a full-on code and possibly infrastructure deploy? What if you could test on a small subset of users and then roll it back immediately if results aren't what you expect? LaunchDarkly does exactly this. To learn more, visit launchdarkly.com and tell them Corey sent you and watch for the wince. A reInvent talk. Both Joe Nash, the creator of AWS Infinidash, and I will be giving a talk on AWS Infinidash at reInvent this year. That sounds like it's a joke, but I will do everything in my power to assure that it isn't. More to come on this front later in the year. The OpenDash schism. A fair number of people chimed in talking about how AWS Infinidash was yet another example of AWS not respecting pre-existing open source communities. Rather than by working with the OpenDash community, they just went ahead and launched their own Infinidash managed service. This was an easy joke that many people made and should give AWS serious cause for reflection as to how they're coming across versus how they think they're being perceived. AWS legal. I've heard a couple whispered accounts that AWS Legal had reached out internally to folks about leaking confidential information before they realized the joke. Hug ops to them. Given who they are and what they do, they can't afford to sit around waiting for jokes to clarify around stuff like data breaches. Nothing but love for them on this front. I can understand their confusion. Now, what did Infinidash get right? All of these shortcomings pale in relation to the inescapable truth that AWS has a passionate enough community to make what could have been a one-off throwaway gag like this something that went viral. The fact that this kind of enthusiasm for AWS doesn't manifest for real service launches indicates that they haven't harnessed their own community effectively yet. No shame here, it's a very hard thing for them to get right, and I don't have a magic answer that would resolve it for them. It's hard to imagine another company's community putting this much effort into a joke. The fact that this happened organically and still has relevance almost a week later demonstrates that for better or worse, AWS has lodged somewhere in our hearts and hopefully won't be killing us anytime soon.
This has been a Humble Pod production. Stay humble.